So I'm sure there are people cross-shopping between the M2 iPad Air and the previous M1 model, as well as those considering the upgrades, and so today I want to compare both of these and basically illustrate how similar these iPads are. Beginning with the design, the Air 6 looks near identical to the Air 5, which is funny because that looks identical to the Air 4, which looks identical to the iPad Pro 2018. Wow, they've been reusing this design for a long time, but I can't blame Apple for doing this because it's a practical design that works. The flat edges are easy to grip onto and of course helps accommodate the Apple Pencil on the sides. It would be nice if the bezels were thinner, but they do ultimately serve a purpose. You can still place your finger somewhere when holding the iPad. The display also similarly has no upgrades over the iPad Air 5 and 4, but it does the job for the most part. It's 10.9 inches LCD, it has a resolution of 2360 by 1640 with 500 nits of brightness, it's laminated with P3 support, True Tone, and has an anti-reflective coating. Now I know some techies who need that buttery smooth 120Hz refresh rate are gonna miss that here with the Air, but to be honest, the animations of iPadOS are very slick, so I don't notice the lack of 120Hz. Brightness is also completely fine for indoor usage, and the pencil experience is unaffected by the lack of 120Hz on both these iPads. It's a laminated panel, so it's still much better to jot things down on these iPads compared to the iPad 10. You know what else would be better for me? If you subscribe to the channel, of course. Haha, what a horrible segue. Anyways, I would greatly appreciate it. It would bring you the latest about Apple right to subscription box, so please consider it. It would be appreciated. Anyways, let's now move on to accessories because there is one small difference between these iPads, and that's a pencil situation. So the M1 supports a 2nd gen pencil and the M2 supports the brand new Apple Pencil Pro. However, both do support the cheaper USB-C pencil. Now, whilst it's a shame the older iPads don't support the Pro Pencil, I find it more annoying the M2 does not support the older 2nd gen pencil. I understand moving the camera to the landscape position might have broken support, but for those considering the upgrade from older iPads, it is very irritating. You have to buy both a new iPad and spend another $129 on a new Pro Pencil, even if your 2nd gen works completely fine. Yes, you can go for the USB-C pencil that's cheaper, but remember that's a downgrade over the 2nd gen pencil, so it's a negative for the Air 6 regardless. But of course, if you're new to the iPad, this is not a problem and you would be happy with either pencil. The Pencil Pro does have some cool upgrades, like a squeeze gesture to bring up a tool palette, a gyroscope that allows you to rotate the pencil for brush tools, haptic feedback, and also Find My support. But the 2nd gen pencil is also similarly great for artwork and note-taking, and can be found for much less. In fact, it's often the same price as a Type-C pencil but offers wireless charging. Both do support the same Magic Keyboard however, and I think it's a must-have for anyone wanting the iPads to be a laptop replacement. Now yes, you might be put off by the retail price, it is very expensive, but because this one's been around for a few years, you can find this for much less from third parties. I've seen it for as low as $150, and you can find it for even less on the used and refurbished market, and that's an incredible price for how good this keyboard is. Now it is with the base iPad, and the Pro iPad gets keyboards with a function row and this doesn't, but I still prefer the floating design of the Air's Magic Keyboards compared to the stand design the Magic Keyboard Folio has on the iPad 10. Performance-wise, we have M1 in the Air 5 with 8GB of RAM, and the M2 with 8GB of RAM in the Air 6, and frankly, I was kind of surprised by this because the M2 is nearly 2 years old, and so with the iPad Pro getting the M4, that could have paved the way for the Air to get M3, but surprisingly they stuck with the M2. Now it's not a bad chipset, it's still very powerful and gives you access to pro apps on this iPad, but the M1 Air also handles these apps just as fine. M1 and M2 are very similar at the end of the day, and there's no real improvement in terms of performance when it comes to day-to-day usage. Now yes, I'm aware a slightly newer chipset will give the Air 6 the upper hand software-wise, but considering M1 is still more than powerful enough for most people's needs, the older Air should get another 5 years of updates maybe, and definitely will get the same iPadOS features as the M2 model, because as I said, these chips aren't actually that different. Battery life is about the same as well between these iPads, so they're both solid, but I will say it's worse in my experience compared to other iPads specifically the regular models. I'm not exactly sure why, maybe the M series chipsets in here use more power, but for most people's needs, these iPads should be fine endurance-wise. Both models also feature the same USB-C port, so whilst it doesn't offer Thunderbolt speeds, this is still much better than the iPad 10 with data transfers up to 10 gigabits per second, so transfer speeds should be completely fine, and it does also support displays up to 6K resolution. Touching on the cameras, the rear camera once again is the same on both models, and I was certainly surprised Apple did not bother to add a flash on the S6 when the Mini has had one for years. But anyways, the camera here is fine. Apple does recommend you to add footage you record on the iPad to your Final Cut timeline, but please do not do this. It's not the worst sensor in the world, but the rear camera should really only be used in a pinch for things like scanning documents. The front-facing camera, however, is fantastic for video calls since it does have center stage, so it follows you around the room, and it's now in a much better position on the S6 with it moving to a landscape orientation, and that, I admit, is a legit upgrade. Speakers and mic-wise, there's no real difference between these iPads. They're both very solid. The Air does not feature quad speakers like the Pro, but it surprisingly gets close with 2 less speakers, and because it's still a stereo pair, it's great for watching movies with. And the mics have never disappointed me when it comes to calls. Moving to biometrics, say with me guys, the S6 is the same as the Air 5 in this aspect as well. Who figured? Jokes aside, Touch ID is something I do actually prefer because with Face ID on the iPad Pro, I do manage to block the Face ID modules when using the Pro models, and so I just find it easier to press the home button and boom, the iPad instantly unlocks. It's super reliable. Bluetooth and Wi-Fi connectivity have been upgraded on the S6, but there's not been a huge difference in my testing. Both have been perfectly fine. Now I do want to finally mention, yes, I'm aware the S6 has one crucial upgrade, which is double the base storage. It starts with 128 gigs now and maxes out at 1 terabyte if you have overkill storage needs. But as a rebuttal point, I would say that A, if it needs a basic 64 gigs on the Air 5, is actually just about enough for most. And also B, you can use external storage. Thankfully, external SSDs are pretty cheap nowadays, so as long as you're willing to carry them around for your creative workflow, you can make do with the older 64 gig M1. So overall guys, I don't think my conclusion is going to be a huge surprise. I don't think the S6 is worth buying. The only meaningful changes are double the base storage and the landscape camera, but they're not massive upgrades, and so I'm still going to point towards many going for the M1 Air instead because it offers 98% of the same experience for much less. In the US, it's often on sale for $399, and I'm sure it's going to continue getting cheaper as retailers clear existing stock. The M1 still handles everything perfectly fine, even if your needs are not basic and you are creative looking to push your iPads. By doing more complex laid artwork or editing on this, for example, the M1 is still beast, guys, and so the only way I recommend the M2 is once it gets discounted, but even then the Air 5 is going to continue getting cheaper, and do remember if you're doing the basics, like note-taking and watching videos for example, there's also the still very excellent iPad Air 4, which of course shares similar performance to the iPad 10 whilst offering a laminated display and Gen 2 pencil support. The old iPads just offer infinitely better value than the M2, it's simple as that guys, and for those considering upgrading from the Air 5 to the S6, please don't do that, it's not worth it. You're basically buying the same iPad twice. Also forgot to mention this, but the colours on the S6 absolutely suck. I prefer the blue with the Air 5, so that's another reason to go with the older iPads. Anyways, let me know your thoughts in the comments, make sure to like and subscribe for more content like this, and thank you for watching.